Good morning, happy Sunday. Well, it's probably not Sunday when you're watching this, but it's Sunday for me now. Today we're going to pour a couple more test candles, and while I do that, I thought it would be fun to talk about 5 things that I wish I knew before I started wick testing. Sorry about the lighting, I know it's not perfect, but it kind of just is what it is. The first thing that I wish I knew is that remelting and repouring is a thing. I don't know if everyone does that, and I understand why they might not do it. But when you're pouring so many testers trying to find the correct wick for your setup, it can be extremely wasteful and extremely expensive. You can easily, especially with no fragrance testers in the beginning, you can easily remelt and repour most of that wax, as long as it's not super dirty with wick debris and things like that. And especially if it's fragrance free, you can use it a few times and still get some really valuable information without wasting your wax and fragrance. And of course, you're reusing your jars, so that always helps. But wax isn't cheap either. So remelting and repouring is an option if you're down to do it. The second thing that I wish I knew is that fragrance-free testers are useful. And by that, I mean that in the beginning, I felt like I needed to be always testing my fragrance because I essentially was just trying to skip a step and go straight to fragrance. And I realize that's how a lot of people probably do it. But for me, it didn't benefit me to skip the step of trying it with no fragrance. I think trying without fragrance, especially if you're new like me, can give you the opportunity to really get to know your jar that you have, your wax, and how it behaves with different wick setups before you add another variable in. Because as we'll talk about probably later in this little video, fragrance can be very complex and very complicated. Um, and it can change the way that your setup burns in an extremely dynamic way. So I know that when I say that, you're probably like, well, if it's going to change how it burns, then why start with no fragrance? But in my opinion, I think it's helpful to start with no fragrance so you get a baseline and you can build from there. And like I mentioned, I think it's really responsible and helpful to have that baseline knowledge and skill set if you're just starting out like me. So that way exactly how your fragrances are affecting your setup. Since I just mentioned that fragrances are so complex and they can really change your setup and how your burns go, let's just talk about that. The third thing I wish I knew is that every fragrance is completely different, has completely different characteristics. Some of them might be similar, but in general, they all burn completely differently. There's, certain families where they might be comparable, similar to each other, but different fragrances are going to need a different wick. So not even just, oh, this one needs a bigger one or a smaller one in the same series, but they might need a completely different series of wick to make it work. And some wicks and fragrances will not go together whatsoever. Or like your setup just may not be conducive to a good burn for a particular fragrance, and you may end up having to throw that fragrance out and try something else completely different. I've done that once or twice. So fragrances all have their own personality and they all burn completely differently. So knowing that and having an open mind about what wick you may need to try or introduce, or you may need to try a few different ones to successfully use that fragrance is helpful. Keep an open mind. Tip number 4 is that you need to burn darn near the whole near jar, or pretty much the whole jar if you're not doing that. I've definitely come to the conclusion that some test burns will show you their character pretty quickly. Like there's some that will begin to tunnel fairly fast and it's clear that it's not going to work out. I don't mean those. I mean ones that are like borderline and you're not sure. It's really important to start with a tester that is darn close to full, in my opinion. It doesn't necessarily have to be completely full. That's what I was doing in the beginning. I have since reduced the fill weight of my testers by about an ounce. And I know that some people start lower than that. They'll do like 3/4 of a jar or something. To each their own. I know it's a way that you can conserve wax, but the behavior of the wick can change so much from top to bottom based on heat and jar anatomy. So, especially if you're using a jar that is different width at the top, or a different diameter, excuse me, at the top versus the bottom, things can change dramatically from top to bottom with these wicks. So I feel personally it's very, very important that if you're unsure about how the wick is performing, I'm not, again, not talking about the ones that you can count out immediately, but the ones that are kind of unsure, you need to give them a fighting chance. And usually that's, I think for me, within burns like 3 to 6, you can kind of figure out exactly what is going to happen with the wick. I definitely have learned a lot from other makers here on YouTube. And one of those makers, his name is Wade from Black Tie Barn. He's extremely good at teaching and he makes a lot of really helpful content. So if you are a new candle maker like me, I encourage you to check out Wade's channel. He also has a store where he sells his candles, he sells wicks, he sells fragrance. So go support him if you're not already doing that. But his content is super duper helpful. And I remember him mentioning how candles are essentially a mini combustion chamber in one of the videos I watched. And that definitely changed the way I was looking at my candles and how they were burning and how they can dramatically change from top to bottom. I've had plenty that looked great for burns 1 through 3. And then starting on burn 4, 5, 6, they started to get really hot or drown. Couple other things have happened. Or conversely, I've had ones that looked like they weren't going to do good at the top, and then burns 2, 3, 4, they looked a lot better. So it just depends on the wick type and your personal setup that you've got going on. But give your setup a fair chance and burn a pretty darn near full tester, and give it a few burns before you count it out completely. The 5th thing that I wish I knew before I started wick testing is that I would go through a ton of different wicks. I was completely, I guess, naive, delusional, whatever you want to call it. But I thought that, oh, I'll, just purchase the 1 or 2 wick types that are recommended on the supplier's website in a few different sizes, and I will be good with that. No, no. I mean, if that happens for you, I applaud you. I'm so happy for you. God bless you. That is amazing. But that's not what happened for me. So I now own, let's see, 1, 2, 3. Is that it? LX, Eco, HTP, CD. No, I own 4 different wick families at this point, in various sizes. A couple of those I have like half of the series or more, and I just ordered another wick family. in 3 or 4 different sizes. So stay tuned for Premier 700 testing. But that's something I wish I knew, and I think it's realistic to understand that you may need to purchase a couple to several different types of wicks, and you may end up using all of them at some point in your testing, and you may end up using a few different ones in your finished product, just because certain oils, again, are going to require different different strength of a wick, different type of wick, different braids, things like that. It can get very, very complex. So being realistic and knowing that you may need to purchase several different kinds and that you will need to do extensive research on these wicks and how they work. Again, visit Wade's channel if you haven't already. He does a lot of videos on wicks. Knowing that you may need to do extensive research to figure out what works for your setup is helpful. Okay guys, that was 5 things that I wish I knew before I started wick testing. If you're a maker and there's something you wish you knew before you started, please share it down below. Please like and subscribe. I'd love to see you back here again sometime soon. And if you're not following me on Instagram, it's at Chronicle Home Co over there as well. Thank you for spending your time here. I'll see you again soon.